and Mr. Shakti Sinha for organizing these Mandala Dialogues and for inviting me to chair this session. This dialogue, apparently, is for sharing of ideas and actively engaging young minds and emerging scholars working in the region. That is particularly welcome. We need more academics at an younger age to be specializing on these issues about the neighborhood, and therefore I would certainly congratulate the Nehru Memorial Museum for taking this initiative, and also to having Myanmar as a country of focus, as was mentioned earlier also. I think somehow Myanmar does not get the level of attention or publicity, even in our news media, that an immediate neighbor deserves. So in that sense, it's a very, very welcome initiative. Now, the concept paper says we will focus on national reconciliation and peace process. And I can say, having been ambassador there, that you could not have got a better introduction to the subject than what we heard from Ambassador Vijay Nambiar, who had a ringside view of the peace process as the UN Secretary General's special representative. And it's a very complex process. And while I would not like to say much, and I would like to listen to the young scholars here, but I would say very broadly that it is a complex process, and it's not possible to treat the various ethnic groups in one kind of way. Each one is different. The complexities are there. And you also have to look at it, when you look at this, you have to look at the Burman point of view, who are the majoritarian group. And you will also have to look at the history behind each of these groups, which again is complex. They have their own past affiliations. For example, the Burman probably would think that the fact that there is now a parliament consisting of the two houses set up in Naypyidaw, which has representatives from all these ethnic parties, as well as they have the regional assemblies in the regional capitals, that itself is a significant movement towards national reconciliation. And in fact, if you ever have the opportunity to look at a picture of the Myanmar parliament in session, you will find that many of these representatives of regional political parties would have a distinctive headdress compared to the Burmans. They would probably be dressed somewhat differently, even in terms of their costume. Again, reflective of the identity, a different identity that they would like to convey. Certainly, the peace process began in earnest under the Thein Sein government and continued thereafter under the name Panglong by the lady, Aung San Suu Kyi's government. They have progressed, but they have not progressed very far. There are fundamental differences. One question arises whether it should be dealt with in such a big way rather than in an incremental way. This is one issue that you could look at. For example, I'll give you a simple instance. It's very, very odd that the constitution, as it exists today in Myanmar, provides that while there will be elections to all these regional assemblies, and the elections do take place, and the ethnic parties participate in these elections. But to think that the Shan National Development Party, if it gets a majority in the Shan State Assembly, that their chief minister will be nominated by the president and that chief minister may be an NLD candidate does not sit well with decentralization. Can this not be resolved first before moving on to larger issues about devolution of powers, etc.? So that question does arise. Can they not address some of the more easy issues or important issues right away, rather than leaving it to a very, very large peace process? As I said, each ethnic group is different. For example, if you go to the Rakhine state, it has a history of its own. The Rakhine king, the last king, was in the 18th century. He was defeated by the Burman king from Mandalay, and they carted away the Mahamuni Buddha to Mandalay. Now, the Rakhines have never forgiven the Burmans for this. And even today, if you go to Rakhine state, you will find that they think the Burmans have systematically discriminated against the Rakhines, and they point out to their development indicators being much lower, that their celebrated capital, Mrauk-U, being not developed as a touristic resort as Bagan, and so on. So these are all issues that stay behind their minds, even when they talk about peace process. So anyone looking at it will need to keep in mind these issues, and on top of that, the Rakhines feel they have been burdened with the Rohingya issue. Now, isn't that too much? So how does one deal with this? Now, complicating all this is the role of China. Now, during the brief period when Thein Sein was the president, the Mitsone Dam was suspended, and the Chinese had to take a little backseat, and the Western countries came to engage with Myanmar with gusto, with even President Obama making 2 visits. Things look very, very different. But they are back with a bang, and as was mentioned, today in fact is the second BRI forum taking place in Beijing, where Aung San Suu Kyi is also present. Many say this could be a very transformational week for Myanmar in view of, because with the commitments it may be making towards the China-Myanmar economic corridor. We will have to wait and see. So I think there are so many complex issues that we need to look at. Most important of all for us is what could India do, a large neighbor, and which has done significant amount of assistance and cooperation efforts in the last several decades to Myanmar. How can we be of some help in enabling Myanmar to move towards greater peace and reconciliation? We have today with us 2 young scholars. I would first call upon Dr. Nongtham Jite. Have I spelled correctly? Yes. Okay. He is a research associate in the Center for Myanmar Studies, Manipur University, and from the abstract that he has given, it looks like he has been involved in looking at Myanmar, the peace process, and he has also interacted with several of the Myanmar ethnic groups who also visited Manipur. So what was earlier mentioned was that can the Indian experience in dealing with some of the ethnic groups in India, the Indian experience, can it be of some use? In fact, I am aware that certain representatives from Myanmar have also visited India, particularly Mizoram state in this regard. So please give us the benefit of your understanding and experience.
Thank you, sir. When we talk of Myanmar, contesting views has been arising that is it centralizing the periphery, like a shift of interest from the center to the periphery, or is it something like periphery strikes back to the center? Both sayings have the power, and where lies the middle point? This is what I am trying to extract. And then I'm just trying to re-narrate the narratives which I encounter with some of the, not exactly the ethnic armed group people, but those CSOs who are very much involved in this peace process. And then those CSOs, they came down in December 2018. They visited Mizoram, Assam, and lastly they visited Manipur. And then the Manipur chapter, I was the coordinator of that. And very interestingly, among the CSOs, there were parliamentarians also. The daughter of the first president of Kachin Liberation Army's daughter was very much there. And then I had an encounter with her also. And then some of the San representatives, Karen and Kachin's, a big number, around 40 ethnic CSOs representatives were visited Imphal. Their first priority is to know what is Northeastern India and what is the relation and how the Constitution of India and how the Indian Constitution behave to the Northeastern people particularly. This is how they just want to try to know from us. And then from that encounter, that is what, I just want to narrate. From them only, I came to know that what was very interesting in the political discourse is the polity of Myanmar as opening out as one of the democracy-loving communities of the world, puts the issue of national reconciliation, that is the compromise and peace within the ethnic nationalities, in the center of Myanmar's political vision, which is indeed a very unique form of state-nation making policies in the world. Deeper experiencing of the dynamic of their socio-economic and political maneuvers, we could, however, be a bit skeptic on this issue. Though the current peace, which began in 2011, brought forth new ideas and ways for an appropriate federal structure in the polity, as the National League for Democracy reaffirmed this principle, we can wait and hope that things would be fine in the foreseeable future. This is how they hope. This is how the ethnic minorities, CSOs, people, they hope. And out of that, while evaluating these things, we can come to know that while, we need to understand the complexity, if we want to know the complexity of the ethnic things, especially for the Southeast Asian region, we need to understand 5 parameters. That is the issue of ethnic geography and demography, the pre-colonial and colonial legacy in history and culture, the historic fear, aspirations, or ambition and goal of ethnic groups with contesting selfhoods, the economic factors and trend, regional and international influence is suggested as paradigm of study of the same. These are the paradigm which the scholars which are very much engaged in the Southeast Asian countries very much evolve. And one area which I want to add is that we can also include another factor is that the role of the state in various forms in intervention in the conflict, which helps us to negotiate the problem of understanding and analyzing the subject. This area we need to edit apart from these 5 points. the country's current constitution that took the military regime more than 13 years, that is 1995 to 2008, in drafting officialized the military's domination in Myanmar's politics. Today, the military has a permanent guaranteed representation in the country's lawmaking assemblies, from provincial to national level. Ethnic minorities groups in Myanmar have been struggling for their rights and self-determination since 1948. Many of them have chosen armed struggle for many years. However, federalism has long been perceived as the most fitting solution for the deep-rooted ethnic issues. The current Myanmar's peace process began in August 2011. It has sped up new ideas and ways for searching the answer for future federalism in Myanmar. A key principle in the National Ceasefire Agreement signed in October 2015, where ethnic armed organizations agreed to enter political dialogue to build a federal union based on equality and self-determination for all ethnic groups. In 2016, the National League for Democracy, the political party that leads the current government in Myanmar, reaffirmed its commitment to a federal system and self-determination for ethnic groups. This is how they narrate the whole story to basically to the scholars in Manipur. Perhaps a very unique feature of the manifesto is the centrality amongst the power aspirant of the Democratic Party, the issue of ethnic conflict, which has been plaguing the history of Myanmar from very ancient time. To emphasize as the first principle in polity reconstruction, the issue of ethnic reconciliation and compromise was not in the agenda of nation-making enterprises in modern South and Southeast Asian countries. The validity and relevance of this policy-making exercise is perhaps the reminder of the historical truth of the center-periphery relation in political theory of modern nation-making, particularly Myanmar. And 6 considerations were focused. This is how they refocus the NLD's agenda. That is, number 1, the proposed union of the various communities of some 135 ethnicities would be true and honest pursuit of solidarity and peace with the ethnic groups. Number 2, the nature of political dialogue should be based on the Palung spirit envisioned by Aung San Suu Kyi's father, late Aung San. The third consideration was the making of the federal union amongst the ethnic groups, which would amaze contemporary scholars, enthusiasts on the problematics of federalism. The fourth point was naturally balanced between states and religion, which was also a typical historical problem. The fifth consideration was a fairly distribution of natural resources among the stakeholders of the new polity, which Myanmar specialists of today are blatantly spearheading a stringent criticism of the political economy of the contemporary Myanmar as undergoing the strains of capital, ceasefire capitalism, that is Kevin Wood's term. The last deal promises was the peaceful resolution of difference between the ethnic groups which remain as a chimera of historically overburdened contradictions overpronounced through the vagaries of exploitations by empires through capitalism. This is how they narrate to the scholars, to the parliamentarians. Even they used to meet the parliamentarians, member of, even chief minister of our state. They have the chance of interaction. This is how they narrate. And from my view, when we talk of this India-Myanmar relation and then India's engagement with Myanmar as far as to this border area region, two-pronged strategies are dealing at the border areas as regard to India-Myanmar relations as far as my knowledge is concerned. One is the military to military, and then Indian officials with the border people. This is the latest trend which I found. Because if we go through the MOU of Intelligence Exchange Cooperation, which was signed in 2008, there is a kind of exchange of real-time action intelligence to deal with the effective and intelligence insurgents in the border region. this is a very pertinent and this is a very pertinent, MOU which was signed between India and Myanmar. Out of that, we can see is that Aung San Suu Kyi visited Sagaing region, and he visited Kamti, Lahe, and Homelin. And then, and after that, I don't know the relevancy. The general headquarters of NSNK at Sagaing region, this is Taga, has been captured by Tatmadaw without any blessing, even though ceasefire, there is a bilateral ceasefire with the NSNK and then the government of Myanmar, which was signed in 2012. And government asked them to come under the framework of national ceasefire, which they are very much hesitant, because their determined geographical boundary is beyond Myanmar, as far as this NSNK is concerned. And even the geographical boundary which is determined by the NSNK and the geographical boundary which is determined by the CNF, that is Sin National Front, is also, overlapping in the sense that very interesting is that CNF is having in the national ceasefire list, and whereas NSNK is having only at the bilateral ceasefire. So, among these things, apart from these things, after capturing this region by the Tatmadaw, the interesting point is that, which I came to know, is that Consulate General of India, which is at Mandalay, Sir Nandan Singh Basura, had a field visit. He had a field report, which is shown in his Facebook pages. That is written that India is going to fund 25 million in 5 installments for road construction, bridges, school, health center care under India-Myanmar Border area development. And he also visited Leh Township and then giving assistance for cardamom plantation, telling that instead of opium plantation to uplift their social, economic livelihood, to have sustainable income, job opportunities, local development, law and order, peace, eradication, poppy, and so on and so forth. And then after that, Ambassador Sarab Kumar visited international land border, and he even reached the Indo-Myanmar Friendship Road. And see the dynamics, the things, the visiting of Aung San Suu Kyi to the Kamti area, and then the capturing of this Taga, and then after that, visiting of the Indian officers to that area. Even I myself belongs to the northeastern part, the remote part, and we cannot intrude that area, because a lot of security problems. Even those big things, they could intrude those areas. Earlier, nobody could enter those areas. The changing dynamics of how the India-Myanmar relations is going on. And keeping this view, some are in the opinion that the development process at the border, which is done by the Indian, is like, something, a proxy kind of development. This is some are of the opinion. That is, through the Indian agencies, Myanmar government is trying to develop this northeast region. This is some are of the opinion, not my opinion. Like this, the latest development is coming up, and then my concluding remark is that most of the ethnic groups wanted to be divided into 8 ethnic states instead of 7 ethnic groups. They also want the constitution to guarantee their cultural rights and cultural and control over land resources in their own territories. That is somewhat, I don't know this, some kind of natural resource nationalism. And they also believe in this NLD stand for reconciliation. But they are very much skeptic about this military stand for reconsolidation. The meaning of reconciliation and reconsolidation is almost different. And then they also very much concerned about that ceasefire capitalism, that is co-optation of borderland elites and the centralization of political economic powers. This is a term propounded by Kevin Woods. And the other thing is the intervention of politics by the military at the border, which likely escalated another kind of conflict. I don't know it will be true or not. And then they are also telling us that they have a limited autonomy, even though from this 2008 constitution, those area, Naga sub-administrative zone, they have already given. But the autonomy which they provided is a little bit limited. This is what they subscribe. And most of them think that they are not Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jiten. You have dealt with two somewhat different issues. One is the mainstream peace process, about which you brought out the nuances that existed after Aung San Suu Kyi came into power in terms of the NLD government. You have also mentioned about the India-Myanmar border, the developments taking place there, including what has happened to NSA-NK, some of the development projects being taken up by India. Very interesting. Some of them started even during my time. In fact, if I may mention just for this, it so happened that in 2012, I had mentioned to the Vice President, then Vice President of Myanmar, because we were giving assistance for access roads to be built into that area, Kamti and neighborhood areas, because earlier the plea that Myanmar took when we had asked them to take action against these groups sheltering there was that it was a very forested area. Access is difficult. So we had given them sets of road building equipment to build roads in that area. So having done that, I had mentioned it to the Vice President that I would like to see evidence of it being used there rather than elsewhere. So he was kind enough to take me on a 5-day trip to the Naga self-administered zone in January 2012, when the Naga New Year normally is, the celebration is held on the Myanmar side. And in one of the town hall meetings that took place in Lieshi, I think, a Naga farmer brought a huge plant, a cardamom plant, and placed it in front of the room and said, "We want more of this." So immediately I mentioned to the government, and we trained 100 Naga farmers in cardamom plantation to be able to do that. So you can see some of these developments probably have now taken further shape. We also had a border area development program, building schools, rural health centers, etc., in these areas, so that I don't know if, as you put it, it is seen as coming from Myanmar side. That is one of how they look upon it. But it's a joint cooperation program intended to bring about greater development in this area, and therefore greater cooperation. And it looks from what you have said and what we otherwise know that some of these developments are looking somewhat more positive, which is welcome. But that is quite different from the larger peace process, which of course we will discuss further. We have the other scholar with us, Dr. Pooyam Rakesh Singh, who is with the Indian Council for World Affairs as a research fellow. And from his biodata here, it does appear that he has also contributed articles, a great deal on China-Myanmar relations and about implications of China's infrastructure development program. So I guess when you talk about the peace process, maybe you might like to also dwell somewhat on the China's role and influence in Myanmar. Please.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Nehru Memorial Library for giving me this opportunity. The topic of my paper is Center-Periphery Contestations in Myanmar, Pushed from the Margins. And for this particular paper, I would say that it is a work in progress because I wrote this specially for this presentation. Though I have covered some areas which I have already dealt with before, such as the role of China and also the ethnic peace process which is happening there, with some new updates from time to time. Yeah, in the outline, I would like to discuss briefly what does history has to tell about the developments taking place in Myanmar. But I'm not definitely saying that there is a repetition of history going on in Myanmar as far as the national reconciliation and peace process is concerned. Then I would also like to share something about the 2008 Myanmar Constitution because I think it is very important when we try to understand why ethnic minorities are demanding for more devolution of power from the center, especially because of the long decades of military rule and centralization by the military, which is dominated by the Burma majority community in Myanmar. And then some discussion on the 21st century Panglong Conference. And also I find that the basic principles, the 51 basic principles which have been approved in the second and third sessions of the Panglong conferences, I think these are not the final set of things that we will have, but it is something which will, give us thinking, and also it reflects the kind of, thinking that is taking place and the negotiation which is happening between the different stakeholders in Myanmar in search of a federal structure which is acceptable to the minorities and also to the Burma majority community. And definitely we find some major roadblocks in the peace process. Now, Myanmar is talking about constitutional amendment, and this is a new development, and is interesting from my point of view because the military was very rigid about this thing, but there is some, some change in the position. I wouldn't say that it is a progress already, but there is a movement taking place, and that shows there's some understanding among the stakeholders has been reached in the recent past. And I have some few observations. So first of all, I would like to share this map because when we talk about the different ethnic minorities, we need to have the a picture of the map for Myanmar and also the location. Here I'm not giving the topography, but you can see from these different colors the areas where the ethnic minorities are concentrated. So from this part of Myanmar in the west to the northern part in Kachin and San, all the way down to the Tanintharyi region, and also parts of Mon areas. These are the areas, the outlying peripheries of Myanmar where the ethnic minorities are concentrated. And the central and the southern part of Myanmar is where the majority Burmans are living. So this is important because the minorities are in the periphery. And I'm not going to deal with the history of Myanmar, but what is important is that there is a colonial legacy, but before that, there was also many conflicts and also struggle for power among the different ethnic groups. We have a long history of how the Sans were trying to capture power in Myanmar, and also the long history of fighting between the Burmese and the Mons. And if we take into account the history of Manipur Kingdom, Manipur was also an important power, which was a contributing factor to the downfall of the Myanmar dynasty before the Kongbon dynasty was established. So what I want to share is that the Panglong Agreement, which was signed in 1947, it was an attempt, but it was unsuccessful for various reasons. And one key factor was the untimely demise of General Aung San. But one important thing which keeps coming when we try to understand the national reconciliation and peace process in Myanmar is the issue of autonomy or the right of secession from the Union. So this is a very tricky situation, a very complex situation, which is affecting the overall negotiation between the among the Myanmar military, the Myanmar government, and the ethnic armed organizations. I would put it that way. Now, there is one example which is very interesting, because in 1961, before General Ne Win took over power in Myanmar, there was an attempt for an ethnic federal amendment proposal under the leadership of then Prime Minister U Nu. But Ne Win took over power on the ground that it will be threatening the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Myanmar. And that has been clearly put across by the first keynote speaker, that the non-disintegration of the Union, non-disintegration of the Union solidarity and perpetuation of sovereignty. These three things are there. And when we talk about the Myanmar Constitution of 2008, or the Myanmar Constitution of 1947 or 1974, all these things are connected. There is a thread linking these three constitutions of Myanmar. So, unlike the 1947, I find 1974 constitution, which was made by the military leader under Ne Win's leadership, they deleted the right to secede from the Union of Myanmar, which was there in the 1947 constitution. So that is an interesting development. And I don't need to say it here, but for the sake of information, the 2008 constitution doesn't have any such clause. It is totally, controlled by the military. So that is where the negotiation is taking place, and I think that is the key factor. When I was trying to get some maps and some photographs, I came across many photographs, and depending on their moods and their situation, I find interesting body languages of the important leaderships in Myanmar. Here you can see the Senior General Min Aung Hlaing and the Aung San Suu Kyi, the State Councillor. Now, I have mentioned the first point, but in the second point, bullet point, it is clearly mentioned that 25% seats are reserved for the military in the 2008 Constitution. And if there has to be any major change in the constitutional structure, then there is need for more than 75% voting in the parliament. And without the support from the military representatives sitting in the parliament, it is not possible. That's why constitutional amendment, from my point of view, based on the literature that I have read, I find that if they don't go ahead with the constitutional amendment, or a simultaneous process of writing the constitution of the ethnic states and also the change in the 2008 constitution, this process is not going to, move forward. In the 2008 Constitution, what is very problematic, and it has been time and again reiterated by the ethnic armed organization leaders, is the 48-point basic principles in the Constitution of Myanmar drafted by the military, because everything comes under the control of the military. So when the existence and security of the Union of Myanmar is threatened, then the military can take over the power. So the ultimate sovereignty lies with the military in that context. So it is very centralized, and the ethnic minorities have problem with the current constitution. And also, when we try to read the constitution of Myanmar, you can see the paradox which is, as I mentioned earlier, the thread linking the three constitutions that I mentioned. There's the paradox, especially on the part of the Tatmadaw, about the devolution of power. Because when you concede too much to the parties in the periphery fighting against the central authority, there's the danger of them getting empower and entrance, which can have backlashes for the collective interests of the union. So that is there. But we should not forget the fact that the spirit of the 1947 Panglong Conference, in terms of the legacy of the continuous search for a federal structure, it is ongoing, and the NLD government, under the ever leadership of, I would say, the state councillor Aung San Suu Kyi, is very much dedicated to it. And here we also should not should take into account the NCA, which was signed in October 2015, because it is an important step, no doubt. It is an important step, though it is limited. So far, only 10 ethnic armed organizations have signed the NCA. In the first one, only 8 EAOs signed it, but in 2018 February, 2 more signed. So there are a total of 10 who have joined the NCA framework, but there are many others, especially the Northern Alliance and WA and the Mongla Group, who are not willing to negotiate with the Myanmar authorities, including the military, on various aspects of the political and economic devolution, sharing of power with the central authority. So that is something very interesting. So this constitutional amendment moved by the National League of Democracy, it is very significant. And it is significant because it is also significant from our point of view, because as it was rightly mentioned by my brother Ziten, India has been a country which is trying to help countries in the neighborhood, especially like Bhutan, Nepal, and Myanmar, when it comes to the federal structure and also the institutions building, democratic institution building in these countries. So in this case, now the discussion is about the devolution of more power to the state, the region, and also the self-administered areas. They have 6 total self-administered areas, territories in Myanmar. 5 are self-administered zones, and 1 is the WA self-administered division. So this devolution of power is something which is being negotiated in the last 3 sessions of the Union Peace Conference. I would put it that way. And here I can see that in the picture there is a good rapport between Aung San Suu Kyi and the military chief. And why I emphasize on that good rapport between the two leaders is because though Panglong has not made much progress the way we want it to be, the momentum is lacking and it has been delayed. But we can see that the deliberations which took place between during these 3 sessions so far are productive in the sense that the stakeholders sit together despite various differences, including the parties who are not willing to be part of the NCA. So they have been brought especially the Northern Alliance groups, they have been brought to the forum with mediation by China. And so the Chinese Special Envoy, Mr. Sun Kuo-xiang, he has personally come down to Naypyidaw for these conferences, along with the leaders of the ethnic armed organizations, all the way from Kunming, the province and capital of Yunnan province in China. So that is a very clear indication of how deeply China is involved and how complicated, how complex the situation is for all the parties to this peace process, even for a country like China. So at the moment, the ethnic groups do not want the military to dictate the terms, to include right to secession, removing the right to secession in any of this discussion. It was specifically mentioned during the second session. And most of the ethnic armed organizations, including those who had signed the NCA, they stood against it. And because of the differences in the recent past, two of the major ethnic groups, namely the Korean National Union and the Restoration Council of San State, two major parties in the NCA, they walk out from the ongoing peace talks because of the differences. However, they have met several times informal meetings, both including in Chiang Mai in Thailand, and now they have made a commitment that they are not working out of the NCA. That is the position that they have taken, despite the differences that they have shown over the kind of pressure and the pull coming from the Myanmar military. Now this is the vice chairman. Yes, chairman and the vice chairman of the Korean National Union, sitting with the Myanmar military commander-in-chief. Now, quickly I will discuss some of these basic principles. There are 51, 37 was adopted in the second session, and 14 was adopted in the third session. But what is interesting is that if you go through the bullet points, it is all about a negotiation for establishing a democratic and federal state, but what kind of federalism they will agree upon, that is yet to be finalized. But what is interesting is that you will come across political sector, economic sector, social sector, and land and natural environment sectors, but military sector is missing because that is the crux of the problem. So as I mentioned about the sharing of power, devolution of power at the different levels, but what is very interesting is that on the land and natural environment, the ethnic minorities have put this agenda on the table that any development projects to be undertaken in their areas have to be, approved by the ethnic minority governments or, similar power and stakeholders, because it cannot be dictated only by Naypyidaw. That is the term and condition, which is part of the negotiation. And this is not a good message for countries like China, because they have to deal with both the minorities and also with Naypyidaw for having any such program. And there comes the importance of the suspended Misone Dam. And it is very much in the news because the Chinese have made some statements, the Chinese embassy made some statements after the ambassador visited Mishina in the recent past. So that is there. So, I have discussed this, the importance of these basic factors. Basic principles, and this is the Liza camp where they have some program gathering here is the headquarters of the Kachin Independence Organization. Now we have some major roadblocks. I don't need to emphasize much because the previous speakers have touched upon it. The failure to have an all-inclusive NCA is there. Not all the ethnic armed organizations want to sign the NCA. That is there. Violence continues, especially involving KIA, Tang National Liberation Army, Arakan Army, and the Kokang Army. Now, the problem is also about bringing the non-NCA signatories to these sessions, because whenever they have to organize this, they want to make sure that other parties are also on board. But what is also interesting is that you can see some of the ethnic armed groups are fighting among themselves. It can be over the territorial control or other issues, ideological differences. But the interesting one is the fight between the Restoration Council of San State against, with TNLA and San State Progress Party. Because the last two are not a signatory to NCA, but RCSS is a signatory to NCA. And they are all operating in San State. So that is a very interesting dynamics. So Tatmodo's insistence for non-cessation at the second Panglong, I mentioned, this is a problem. And Sar has also mentioned about the DDR, which the ethnic minorities do not want to accept. And it has been there since they talked something about the border guard force. And that led to the first armed conflict in Kokang with the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army. So the problem is persisting, and there is no way forward. And the temporary suspension by the KNU and the Restoration Council of San States, I have discussed earlier. And also here, the fourth Pangkham summit. Pangkham is also known as the Pangsang. You mentioned about it. So there is a ship, like Sar had rightly mentioned that earlier it was KIO, the Kasin group. Kasins are in majority Christians, and they have very close connection with the Allied forces, especially the UK and the US, even during the Second World War. So when KIO tried to bring USA and other European parties, to the mediating role, the Chinese were not comfortable about it. And now what is interesting is that earlier it was NCCT doing a major role with Liza as a very important place and Messina to a great extent where things were happening. But now the ship is to the Wa area. And the Was and the Monglas, they are like a very close family, very close allies, and they use Chinese currency and they use many, many more things. They are in Myanmar territory politically, but their economy, their language, many, many things, it's just like an extension of China. So it's a very interesting development. I have discussed most of these points, so I'm not reading them out. But here, in this slide, I'm just trying to tell the point that China is playing an important role in holding many informal meetings in Ruili. It can be in Ruili or it can be in Kunming. But in the recent past, Kunming has become the hotspot for having this kind of meetings between the Myanmar authorities and the ethnic armed groups. I think I should not mention about Rohingya. I don't have anything new to say, but there is a joint working group meeting coming up, and this is very important. This meeting on 27 April is very important because they wanted to start the repatriation of the displaced people from Bangladesh back to Myanmar in the mid of November last year. It could not happen. And the Bangladeshi Prime Minister blamed the Myanmar authorities for their failure to create a conducive environment for the displaced people to be, relocated in Myanmar. So that is the only point that I want to mention on Rohingya. Now the amendment of the Constitution I mentioned, NLD submitted an emergency motion to Parliament on January 29. And it was against the established norms and principles which is there in the 2008 Constitution. So the military and USDP, the Union Solidarity and Development Party, they rejected it. However, the move was a very bold decision by the NLD and like-minded groups in the Parliament. But what is very interesting is the formation of a joint committee to draft the amendments. And this is something which is not making much progress, but still this development has something to tell about the overall discussion taking place on this issue of national reconciliation and peace process. Now, I have some observations, and I think I don't have any interesting or new thing to add here. We have some major issues happening. It's a very complex situation, and all the stakeholders have their own stakes involved, and they are not able to move forward, especially on the issue of the military sectors. Because the Myanmar military wants a clause on non-secession in the constitution or any of this political dialogue, which will be later accommodated into the constitution. And also the issue of establishing a single national military, because the ethnic minorities, they do not want to give up their arms. So the idea of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration is something that they do not want to go ahead at the moment, and they want to have a federal military structure where they can also exist independently in their respective ethnic minority states, like in Kachin state or Mon state or in the Wa region, things like that. So that is the key issue as of now. And I hope there will be some positive developments, but I cannot be very optimistic about the situation in Myanmar because in the beginning I mentioned about the history of how the military reacted, and also the military at present has many problems with the government party in power, the government led by NLD, and also they have major differences with the ethnic minorities groups, and fightings are happening in northern Myanmar and also in Rakhine state, and to some extent in the Paletwa township in Sin state. So this is the ground situation that I can share. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, for bringing out the various nuances of the peace process, where it is in, but finally concluding that you are not very optimistic. Now, are there new ideas that need to come which should energize this process? Can this come from the move to bring about some constitutional amendments? Can that infuse greater trust between the Burmans, the military, and the ethnic groups? But of course, the constitutional amendment process is very difficult. It's a high bar that is required. So will that happen? I throw open the floor for some questions. I don't know how much time we have, but at least I suppose we should have a couple of questions to ask the two speakers before us. Please announce your name, affiliation, and then ask the question, but very brief.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Dr. Shiko from ex-Jain. My humble question goes to both the speakers is, how many members are represented to Burmese Parliament from Nagaland, Manipur, and Mizoram? Thank you.
Clarify again.
As I understand that there are two Nagas represented in Burmese Parliament. In that case, how many represented from Manipur and Mizoram?
In the Indian Parliament.
The answer is none, as far as my knowledge is concerned.
Did that there are two from Naga community? Two MPs?
In 2018, by December, the ethnic CSO's members, they have visited northeastern India. This is what I have said, not the parliament. But I've said one parliamentarian from Kachin.
My name is Sagar. I run some media company. My question is to both the, Burmese scholar, that Burma in itself is a very important geopolitical place. And Mandalay was once upon a time the biggest trading hub for South Asian region. So my question goes in that respect, that how far Bangladesh, Myanmar, and India's northeast efforts are on to galvanize the economic, role of this area, which can bring some sort of, improvement. Because improvement comes by two things, either by the trading or by education. So if the trading becomes paramount, then education automatically gets its importance. So how far we are prepared to gear up to galvanize the economy of these three neighboring nations? Thank you.
As a scholar from this, from the border area, we used to try to locate our paradigm from the borderlands perspective, not from this centralized perspective. So let me try to refocus. If you go through this border thread between this Myanmar and India, you have only 62 items, which the trade agreement was done. But out of that 62 items, if only one item is left out, which is having threat, and others failed, that is only the betel nut. That betel nut, too, also, because of the highly taxed, the formal threat was and is abandoned. Only the informal way this betel nut is doing. And then those business wallahs, they are, raising a lot of incomes out of that informal way. And then secondly, when we talk of this education sector from the borderlands perspective, this is one of the issues which I used to raise from the day one. Momolat, who is the present MP of Tamu district, he is a good friend of mine. Before, he was the interpreter. Whenever there was a talk between India and Myanmar at the Belo level, which is at Tamu or More sector, he used to be the interpreter. During your ambassador's period also, sir, he was the interpreter. That fellow, he is now the MP from this NLD. And the issue which I just want to raise as regard to this education sector is that, More, a small town, we have a number of schools, whether it's private sector or government sector. Even we have one college. The problem is that a lot of students, they used to come down to More from Tamu, even from Kali area, even from the Naga inhabited area. They used to come for education, especially for this having to have this English education. The problem is the government of Myanmar still they de-recognize the certificate which is given by the Indian side. This is the problem. So out of that, the only ethnic communities which get profit are the Nepalis and the Sin peoples, because Nepalis, if you go through this Indo-Nepal 3D things, they could settle down, they could buy whatever things, and then not only from this India side, Nepalis are coming from this Mishina area, this Kachin area, and then all the business things which is done at this More Tamu sector is mainly done by the Nepalis. The garment, whatever things. But the grocery things, those people who are at the pew, that is beyond Mandalay, those Indians, they did these grocery things. These things happen, this thing. So, in the central area, when I used to talk with some of the officers at Yangon or in Mandalay, those Burman things, they told me that Indians are NATO. That is, no action, talks only. This is what they have explained to me. I don't know.
Anyway, just conclude it quickly.
So, I'm just narrating, and I don't have any specific answers for that. This is a process.
Sir, I have a small question. I am Dr. Nagendranath Misra. I am a school educationist, but I had the honor to serve at Dimapur, Nagaland, quite some time. Sir, my humble submission is that this reconciliation and peace process, that is very good, but as it has been observed that when there is constitutional amendment, there is a lot of time is taken. How to augment the process, peace process of this in Myanmar? How there is some mediation, talk with this military or the government and the ethnic people? How to augment it in the present scenario? Sir.
Thank you for the question. When we talk about the, trilateral cooperation, say, among Myanmar, China, and Bangladesh, I would mention one important point, that is the power cooperation. They have established a commission, and they are, meeting regularly to work on, say, building transmission line so that the grids can be interconnected. And also, the state of Manipur through More, we have a transmission line already activated, and we are, sharing the power from our side to Myanmar, because they also have power scarcity, especially in Tamu, Namphalong town areas. And, sir, you rightly said that Myanmar is a geostrategically very important place, and Mandalay is considered to be the commercial capital of Myanmar, and the Chinese are, considered to be doing good business in Mandalay especially, and also they are going to, implement this China-Myanmar economic corridor. So in that case, things will, happen very quickly, and we have to wait and watch. As of now, it is a negotiation and deliberation on how to, go about the modalities of cooperation and things like that. And another factor is hundreds of Myanmar nationals, they come to Manipur. Because generally in India, Manipur is a backward, border state. But when it comes to medical science, we have we have a couple of, good hospitals. I would mention the multi-specialty hospital called Caesar Hospital. And Myanmar nationals are coming to Imphal, for cheaper medical treatment and things like that. So that is also one factor. Coming to your question, sir, it will not be a wise step on our part to try to intervene in the internal dynamics that is happening in Myanmar. But I would agree with Ambassador Vijay Nambia when he said that India has to play a certain role, and that can be done through further strengthening of our mutual trust. And one is the security and defense cooperation, because the military, if not the Myanmar government, the military doesn't want over dependence on China, because they know that China has a very long arm, starting from the Communist Party of Burma period. And many of these ethnic armed organizations who are operating now, they were, part of the Burmese Communist Party, which was backed by the Chinese government, especially under Mao Zedong's period. So, despite the goodwill and also the high, volume of trade and investment between the two countries, the Myanmar military, especially the nationalists, so to put it, they are concerned about over-dependence on China. So that is one factor. And the good things that we are doing, we have already discussed, like the border areas development in Sin State, in Naga self-administered region, in Sagang, and also development of other parts of the, more than 1,600 kilometer states of Indo-Myanmar border. So that is happening, and there are many things that we can do, but institution building, capacity building, and those things are important things that India can work on. Thank you, sir.
The only point that I would like to mention what Dr. Jiten said, and I think that that's very, very crucial. The way the trade is being held hostage in that More area by one community there is something that we need to work out something about. This is something we need to look carefully because it will not allow growth of trade. We need to look at ways how to handle this. The second aspect that you also mentioned about the recognition to be given for our institutions' degrees or diagnostic procedures or in the medical area, these are again issues which will significantly expand cross-border economic activity. Thirdly, of course, we will also have to find a way of settling economic transactions. You cannot use the barter system all the time. So these are things which will need to be attended to, but frankly, that is not related to the main theme of today's discussion, which is the peace process. So I thank both the panelists, the young panelists, for contributing to the Mandala Dialogue, which is the whole purpose. Thank you very much.